Welcome to Time Frame Unveiled, where history comes alive. What if I told you the American Civil War wasn't just fought on battlefields, but in every home, every town, and every heart across the nation? Picture this: families torn apart, children scavenging for food, and entire communities on the brink of collapse. This is the war at home, a side of the Civil War you rarely hear about, but one that changed America forever. In today's 15-minute deep dive, we're exploring the untold stories of civilian life during the war, how ordinary people survived unimaginable struggles, and the lasting health and social impacts that shaped the nation we know today. Grab a seat, hit that subscribe button, and let's step back to 1861, a time when America was at war with itself. Chapter 1. The War at Home. A different kind of battle. Let's set the stage. The year is 1861, and the American Civil War has just begun. While soldiers clashed at places like Bull Run and Gettysburg, millions of civilians, men, women, and children, faced a different kind of battle at home. This wasn't about cannons or cavalry charges. This was about survival. The war didn't just disrupt lives, it turned them upside down. In both the North and the South, families were thrust into a world of scarcity, fear, and uncertainty. In the South, the Union's naval blockade choked off supplies, creating massive shortages. Imagine this: a single barrel of flour in Confederate states could cost $100 by 1863. That's over $2,000 in today's money. Families who once lived comfortably were now starving. Women wrote letters describing how they boiled dirt to extract salt, or ground corn cobs into a gritty, barely edible meal. In Richmond, bread riots broke out in 1863. Hundreds of women, desperate for food, stormed shops shouting, "Bread or blood!" That's how dire it got. The North wasn't spared either. While they had more resources, the war effort drained them. Men were drafted into the Union Army, leaving women and children to fend for themselves. Factories boomed with war production, but wages couldn't keep up with inflation. In New York City, the 1863 draft riots turned deadly. Working-class families, furious about being forced to fight in a war they couldn't afford to leave, lashed out, targeting African Americans in a tragic explosion of anger and fear. But it wasn't just about money or food. The war brought constant danger. In border states like Missouri and Kentucky, guerrilla warfare turned neighbor against neighbor. Bands of raiders, some Confederate, some Union, roamed the countryside, burning homes, stealing livestock, and leaving families terrified. One Missouri woman wrote in her diary, "We sleep with our shoes on, ready to flee at a moment's notice." That was the reality for millions. Chapter 2. Civilian Resilience. Stepping up in crisis now, let's talk about how civilians fought back, not with weapons, but with resilience. Women, in particular, became the backbone of society during the war. With men off fighting, women in the North and South took on roles they'd never imagined. They managed farms, worked in factories, and even spied for their side. In the South, women sewed uniforms and rolled bandages, often using their own dresses when fabric ran out. In the North, women like Clara Barton, who later founded the American Red Cross, organized relief efforts, delivering supplies to soldiers and civilians alike. Children stepped up too. Boys as young as 12 worked in fields or factories to support their families. Girls knitted socks for soldiers or scavenged for food. One 14-year-old girl in Georgia wrote, "I walked 10 miles to trade a chicken for a sack of flour. It was the proudest day of my life." These kids weren't just surviving, they were heroes in their own right. Communities banded together too. In the North, sanitary fairs raised money for the war effort. Think of them as massive charity events with bake sales, auctions, and even raffles. In the South, where resources were scarcer, neighbors shared what little they had. One Confederate soldier later recalled, "I fought for my country, but my wife and mother fought harder at home." That's the kind of grit that kept society from collapsing entirely. Chapter 3. Health crisis. Disease outpaced bullets now. Let's shift gears to the health crisis of the Civil War, because this was a war where disease killed more than bullets. 2/3 of the war's 620,000 deaths, over 400,000, were from illness, not combat. Why? Well, the 1860s were a time before germ theory was widely understood. Soldiers and civilians lived in cramped, unsanitary conditions, and diseases like dysentery, typhoid, and smallpox spread like wildfire. In army camps, poor sanitation turned water supplies into breeding grounds for bacteria. A single latrine could contaminate a whole regiment's drinking water. Civilians weren't much better off. In cities like New Orleans, smallpox outbreaks killed thousands. Families locked their doors, but the disease didn't care. One Union surgeon wrote, "I've seen more men die of diarrhea than of Confederate bullets." That's a staggering reality. But here's the silver lining. The war forced medical advancements that changed history. Doctors, overwhelmed by casualties, pioneered new techniques. Amputations, gruesome as they sound, became faster and more effective, saving lives that would have been lost to infection. The use of anesthesia, like chloroform, became more common, making surgery less torturous. And nurses, often women volunteering for the first time, brought compassion to the chaos. Figures like Mary Ann Bickerdike, known as Mother Bickerdike, cared for Union soldiers with such dedication that she became a legend. Hospitals sprang up in both the North and South, sometimes in churches, barns, or even private homes. In Washington, D.C., the Union converted government buildings into makeshift wards, treating thousands at a time. These innovations didn't just help during the war, they laid the groundwork for modern medicine. The Civil War, in a strange way, was a turning point for healthcare in America. Chapter 4. Social impact, shattering norms, building a new society. Finally, let's explore the social impact of the war, because this conflict didn't just end slavery, it reshaped society from the ground up. The most obvious change was the abolition of slavery. With the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863 and the 13th Amendment in 1865, 4 million enslaved people were freed. But freedom wasn't easy. Formerly enslaved people faced poverty, violence, and systemic racism as they tried to build new lives. Many became sharecroppers, trapped in a cycle of debt that was slavery by another name. Yet others thrived, forming communities, starting schools, and laying the foundation for the civil rights movement a century later. For women, the war was a game changer. With men gone, women took on roles that challenged traditional gender norms. They ran businesses, worked as nurses, and even disguised themselves as soldiers to fight. Over 400 women are known to have done this. After the war, many refused to go back to the domestic sphere. This shift planted seeds for the women's suffrage movement, which gained momentum in the decades that followed. The war also deepened class divides. In the North, wealthy families could pay $300 to avoid the draft, about $6,000 today, leaving the poor to fight and die. In the South, planters with 20 or more slaves were exempt, fueling resentment among smaller farmers. This inequality sparked social tensions that lingered long after the war ended. And let's not forget the psychological toll. The war left a generation traumatized. Families mourned sons, husbands, and fathers. Sometimes entire towns were wiped out. Terms like soldier's heart emerged to describe what we now call PTSD. Civilians, too, carried scars, memories of hunger, loss, and fear that never fully faded. A legacy of resilience. As the Civil War ended in 1865, America was a nation transformed. The war at home wasn't just a backdrop. It was a crucible, forging a new society through struggle, innovation, and sheer determination. Civilians didn't just survive. They adapted, they innovated, and they rebuilt. The health advancements saved lives far beyond the 1860s, and the social changes, though imperfect, set the stage for a more equitable future. Thanks for joining me on this journey through history with Timeframe Unveiled. If this deep dive into the war at home moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. We've got more stories to uncover together. What's next? Drop a comment and let me know which Civil War topic you want to explore. Until then, keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you in the next video on Timeframe Unveiled.